Okay. Awesome. Well, listen, I'm so grateful to see every one of you here. This is kind of like my morning home group, seeing all the boxes everywhere. It's really great. I'm zooming in from Mississippi, and that's why I talk this way. So later, Tom will do a version in English if you're having a hard time with this heavy accent of mine. And I'm really grateful to be here. So I God got me sober on June the 14th of 2004. And for that, I'm immensely grateful. My life has just, it was a struggle, at first, and it was very confusing. I knew how to do a lot of things, but I didn't know how to do recovery. And thank God for sponsorship and the mentors that I've had along the way that have just been a godsend to me. And it's just been amazing. One of those mentors that I ran into was a guy named Wally Patton. Wally wrote a book. He's written several books. This is his latest one. Can y'all see that? It's the Back to Basics of Recovery, and by Wally Patton, Paton. And a lot of what I do is in Wally is a he is an AA historian and speaker. And I heard about him on a site visit out to the Betty Ford Center. I was an alumni coordinator too, so I have a very affinity for alumni programs. For 11 years, I was with the treatment center down in South Mississippi, and I ran and built their alumni program. So I love all you alumni here. This is so exciting for me. And I met Wally Patton, and there was this thing that he was doing where he was taking people through the steps in these series of workshops, and I just got overwhelmed by that, and a lot of the history. And like Katie, I'm a real fan of the history of where we came from. I just believe, if you really want to know where we're going, you got to know where we've been. And so one of the things I wanted to start with was 12-step recovery as we know it today is vastly different than it was in the early days. And I mean, just by virtue of the fact that here we are all zooming, we can see that there's been vast changes to recovery, to 12-step fellowships. And Bill Wilson himself said one time, he actually wrote that AA, and I take this to be recovery, it has to change lest it die. And so he even could see that there were changes that were going to take place, and rightfully so. But one of the things that was so dramatically different about the early days of recovery than today, and the effectiveness of it was that in the early days of recovery, you couldn't just walk in to a 12-step fellowship. Back in those days, there were just one. This even predates Al-Anon in the 1940s, but you couldn't just walk into a 12-step fellowship, declare yourself a member, sit down, get a cup of coffee, and start sharing.
Sure.
This just wasn't done. And so it's vastly different today. The way that they did the steps. So if you were a newcomer back in the 1940s, and you came to a 12-step meeting, of course, AA was the only one, you would be immediately identified as a newcomer. And you would be escorted, you would be shown where the beginner meeting was. So you would be taken down to the beginner meeting, that you'd get a coffee, that you'd be introduced to someone who would take you to a seat. And at your very, very first AA meeting, in this beginner meeting, first meeting, you would take the first three steps. The whole group would take the first three steps together. And the way they did it was the big book, of course, back in those days, the big book was not just a big book, it was a big, expensive book. In today's economy, a big book in the 1940s cost about $100. So they passed the basket to her for just one copy of the big book. It never left the meeting hall typically. And it was a great honor to come to the podium and read from the big book. And so they would read passages out of the book that discussed the steps and told you how to take the steps. And so someone would read the instructions. Everyone in the room would follow the instructions. And at the end of your first meeting, you would have taken the first 3 steps. And you were invited then to come back. The meetings were just once a week. You were invited to come back the next week. And in your next meeting, you did steps 4 and 5 with this fellow is now your, or lady is now your sponsor. And so you would, in the meeting, you would follow the instructions. The newcomer never wrote their inventory. The sponsor wrote the inventory, interestingly. And so you would then go through your 4th and 5th step and make an appointment to share. So the inventory was written in your second meeting with your sponsor there. And then you would share your 5th step with your sponsor separately. You came back for your 3rd meeting. And in your 3rd meeting, you would do steps 6 through 9. You would go over the amends process, of course, the writing of it, the character defects and the writing of it, making your list. And then with your sponsor's assistance between week 3 and 4, you would go make an amend. And then you would come back for your 4th meeting. And in your 4th meeting, you would do steps 10, 11, and 12 with a guided meditation that represented your 11th step and a commitment to carry the message to others. And then you would be invited to your 5th meeting. And at your 5th meeting, you were assigned one of the next newcomers. So this was wildly successful to the extent that long about in the mid 1950s, in the big book, they wrote a forward to the 2nd edition. The 2nd edition to the big book came out, and they wrote a new forward to the 2nd edition. On Roman numeral 20, the forward to the 2nd edition in the big book, it says 5 lines down from the top of the page. It says, of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, 50% got sober at once and remained that way. 25% sobered up after some relapses, and among the remainder who stayed on with AA showed improvement. So they kept copious notes also back in those days. And so they knew, they followed and they carefully monitored the progress of all the members. And so this represents a 50 to a 75% recovery rate from alcoholism in the 1940s. And I believe, and many believe, that there's some takeaways, some things that we could learn from the way they did things in the 1940s that could really help us today. Because our recovery rates, as you guys know, are vastly, vastly different. I wanted to talk to you about all of this. One of the things that they did a lot, and I'm going to tip this down so you can see I love a whiteboard. I just love a whiteboard. I don't know if I like to draw, my wife likes to paint. I went looking for a pen, and this is what I found: brushes. I found just nothing but brushes. There was no pens anyway, but that's a whole nother story. But in the early days, I don't know if do you guys know about you guys know the symbol on the AA coins, the circle and the triangle? Did y'all know that, well, the triangle part of that, did you know that the triangle part of the circle and the triangle, that's one of the unsung heroes of 12-step recovery. And that was a gift to us by Ann Smith, who was Dr. Bob's wife. Now, she was a faithful member of the Oxford group. She was, for the Oxford group, what we kind of know of today as an AA circuit speaker or an NA circuit speaker. She was a circuit speaker for the Oxford group. So she was quite the recovery lady. And she came up with this notion. The first thing she came up with, this is one of the symbols. So she said, well, that the symbol of addiction, she said, was a square. And she would draw a second square around it, and she would put a little person inside. And then she would draw these little lines here and here. And she says, this is the symbol of alcoholism, the symbol of addiction. And she would say, doesn't that look like a prison cell? Looks like a person just trapped in a prison. And the way she would draw it would be all of the energy is going to this person. It's all about, I know in my addiction, it was all about me. It was all about what I wanted. It was all about me, 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 me. And I never realized that it was a trap, that I was stuck in this prison of, as the big book says, selfishness and self-centeredness. So she says, this is the symbol of our problem. And then, or she didn't, I'm sure she probably used a chalkboard because she didn't have these cool whiteboards that I just adore. And so she says, but the symbol of recovery, she says, is a triangle. Triangle is the symbol of recovery. And the way the triangle works is you've got your higher power at the top. You've got me on one corner. You've got everybody else, all the others at the other corner. And the way that the energies work is that the energies kind of go back and forth. The energies go from me to a higher power, from me to other people, back and forth. And we relinquish, we're not codependent, we relinquish others to their higher power. And so others have their right relationship with God. I'll never forget when I was with Tom Roman. It was one of the first, I think it was the very first trip I had made away from my little buddy, my little bitty boy who had been born. And I was just, we circled up and we shared, and it was my turn to share. And I said, I just got to tell you guys, I'm so grateful to be here, but I'm so sad about being away from my little boy, and I mean, I think I cooked them a couple of weeks worth of meals. I was only going to be gone 3 days. I washed everybody's clothes. I emptied every garbage can in the place. I did, I filled up all the gas, cars with gas. I just did everything because I was just so worried. And one of the people in the circle, and I'll never forget, said to me, don't you know, and don't you believe in your heart that you have a higher power that's looking after you? And I said, I really do. He said, well, don't you believe that your little boy, Alex, has got one too, that's looking after him? And boy, my heart just sort of opened up right then. And I went, you're right. And it's not me. And it's not me. I'm going to tell you, better watch out what you do in recovery, this recovery journey. I don't know if any of you are relatively new. I don't want to scare you. I'm 65 with a 5-year-old, as I'm a first-time father. So I'm tired. I'm tired all the time. I'm just tired, but I'm grateful to be here with you. So here's the way this works. Now, the problem is that there are blocks. There's things that block us from our higher power, and there's things that block us from other people. And what do you guys know? Those blocks are the character defects, right? Those are the character defects. So my dishonesty, my fear, all of these things, they affect my relationship with God and my relationship with other people. And we know, you guys know, that one of the purposes of the steps is to remove those blocks, those barriers, so that we can have this open communication, so that when we go to the supermarket, we're not hiding behind the frozen food, afraid we're going to see somebody, right? And so that's what we're doing. We're removing those. Now, and if you're like me, I'm kind of like, I'm an all or nothing kind of a guy. I took those steps. I looked at those steps. I kind of made them up in my head a little bit. And I sort of didn't read them very carefully I looked them over and I kind of went through the steps and I was like, well, been there, done that, yeah, I get that. I get that. I got to the immense part and I think I said probably won't do that, but it's adorable that y'all included that. Thanks for sharing. And so many of us, I've been this kind of all or nothing, thinker. I had this notion that I was going to need to have every one of my character defects removed. And, in order for me to have a relationship with God and a relationship with other people, I was going to have to be cleansed. It was probably going to take bleach. I didn't even know. But I thought that what I was going to need to do was really get completely wiped out of all of my character defects. And I was wrong about that. Let me show you how there's a symbol that demonstrates kind of how this part works. So I want you to think about this as a big long tube right here. And over here, here's my higher power over here, and here's me over here. And there's things that get in the way of my open communication. Now, I know, and you guys know, and I saw this in my little boy Alex, that when little guys are born, little girls are born, oh, there's my wife Beth. Want to say hey? Say hey, Beth.
Hey,
She's the artist. I already showed your brushes. I was looking for a pen, and all I found was a whole thing of brushes, not one pen. So I was either going to have to brush what I needed, or there it was. So anyway, when we're born, you know how it is. We're open channels to God, right? We're free. There's nothing standing in the way between us and God. But over time, things build up and they create a block between me and God. Let me give you an example. My best example is in a story, and this is the story of the cookie. So here I am. I'm this little guy, and I'm in the house, and I smell that my mom is baking cookies, and I go into the kitchen and I say, Mom, you're a genius. How did you know? And I said, please, can I have a cookie? And Mom says, no, it's too close to dinner time. These are for later. You cannot have a cookie now. You will ruin your dinner. I throw a fit. I am not happy. I want a cookie. I start pestering Mama. I want a cookie. I want a cookie. I start pestering her, and I get angry. And she says, get out of the kitchen. You can have a cookie later, but get out of here. And I leave, and I am angry. And so, but I'm in the next room, and all of a sudden I hear the back door slam. And I just recognize that I have a window of opportunity. And I sneak into the kitchen, and Mom is nowhere in sight. And I get a chair, and I slide that chair over to where that pile of cookies is cooling, and I climb up on that chair. Now, I'm really clever. I reach way around to the back to pull one out that would be, very much unseen. I get that cookie out, and I recognize that I need another one. So with all the stealth that I can muster, I reach around, grab a second cookie, maintaining the integrity of the pile. I come down. Now, I dust for fingerprints because I have seen CSI Mississippi, and I make sure that everything is exactly where it's supposed to be. And I take my cookie and I go to my room to enjoy my cookies. Well, you know the way it goes. It's not too long before there's a knock on my door, and fear shoots up my spine. And my mom comes in and she says, you didn't happen to get one of those cookies, did you? And of course, I say, heavens, no, I didn't get a cook. Oh, I wouldn't. No, I wouldn't. not it. And as she wipes the crumbs from my chin and holds the evidence in front of me. So I then, something happens to me. I get a good talking to, something, and then mama comes to me and she says, now, you promise not, don't lie to your mama. And you come give me a big hug, and don't lie to your mama. Don't lie to your mama, and all will be forgiven till you want to say you're sorry and all of that. So in the story, there's things that have built up in here, right? There's these things that are blocking me. There's fear, right? I mean, there's selfishness, there's anger, there's fear, there's resentment, and all of these have built out. But with my mother's help, she helps me find a path for forgiveness, and all those things are wiped away. However, as we get older, and we, especially if we're practicing our addiction, you know how we do, we tend to just kind of, we got a problem, we throw it in the back, I'll deal with that later. And these things tend to build up. They build up and they build up, and I don't deal with them, and I hope they'll go away. And I suffer from a little bit of kind of a toxic wishful thinking, and they build up and they build up, and they can build up to an extent that I have blocked this channel between me and the higher power. And many of us might think, well, I need to have all of these taken out in order for me to regain the path to my higher power. The theory that they followed in the 1940s was this: no, all you need to do, let's deal with what's most prevalent first. Let's deal with the things that are currently you're dealing with now, and we'll develop this path between you and God. And as time goes on, the spiritual axiom is more will be revealed. The truth is, when I did my first inventory, I wasn't even aware. I was a blackout drinker. I wasn't sure who I had hurt, and all the stuff I had done. And and the first inventory I did, I did the best I could. It wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But the beautiful thing is, because of step 10, I was able to do it again. And I was able to do it again. And I was able to look. And eventually, more was revealed. So the theory is if we do our first inventory, the first inventories they did in the early days was considered kind of a spot check inventory, dealing with the things that were currently bothering you, and that more would be revealed, and we could eventually, by working the 10th step, deal with more and more stuff. Does this make sense to y'all? Does that seem reasonable? I was really, without understanding this principle, I was given a gift. My sponsor was a transplant from New York City, retransplanted all the way back to central Mississippi. And he took me through, you know how it is. He just took me through the processes that he went through. And what he went through was old school 12-step recovery, old school AA, and he didn't know any other. There was this, and that's what I did. And the notion from the 1940s that he practiced and that he instilled in me was, we take the steps quickly and often. We take the steps quickly, we take the steps often. How many of us, get stuck on a step? How many of us, we don't push all the way through and get through the whole thing. And so the idea of these axioms is, let's get through the steps really quickly. Let's get these things done in a hurry. Let's rush through. Let's get you to the object of the game in the 1940s was to get someone to the 12th step as quickly as possible, so that they could have that spiritual awakening, knowing that more would be revealed. as opposed to, now I know, I want you to hear me very clearly in this. There's a lot of us that go through a lot of different experiences, and some of us go through a lot of written work. And of course, in treatment centers, that's extraordinarily appropriate. And if you are doing a step experience that is a slower, more methodically paced, work through the steps, that is 100% absolutely, that's wonderful. Anybody anybody that sits with somebody and goes over steps over a cup of coffee is a hero to me, in whatever method that you choose. I'm just simply showing you kind of some of the processes they went through in the 1940s that maybe we could glean a little bit of understanding and might help to modify some of the things, and in a way take some of the stuff from the 1940s that we can latch on to, and then go from there. So the other part of all of this was the inventory process. So when you're doing your inventory process in the 1940s, it was done pretty simply. There were three ways they did their inventory. The first one, the first thing that they wrote about was, you know, what are you angry? This is bad diction. This is bad language. What are you angry at? I don't think I should end that with a preposition. I'm going to have to go back and rethink that. So what are you angry? That's the way we say it in Mississippi. What are you angry at? And so, and then they would be asked to make a list of what are the things. They didn't have to write an explanation, right? It was what are you angry at? Because the explanation would come from the stories, you see? So what are you angry at? My wife, I'm angry at the popo, I'm angry at work, I'm angry at my boss, I'm angry at my kids, I'm angry at my mom. You make a list. And they never worried about like the column. There wasn't, did you know in the big book, that columned inventory in the big book, that's in there where it has the columns? Have you ever noticed how the description in the big book doesn't really match that example that's in there? And I came to learn that instructions for how to do a columned inventory were never published until the 1970s. So literally in the 40s, nobody knew how to do it. Nobody used a columned inventory. They made lists. The second part of the inventory, they asked this question: what are you afraid of? There I go again, ending with a preposition. What are you afraid of? And so you'd make a list of what are you afraid of? I'm afraid of the future. I'm afraid of failure. I'm afraid this isn't going to work for me. I'm afraid that my husband isn't going to come back. I'm afraid my girlfriend's going to hate me. I'm afraid. When I was getting sober, I was married at the time. It was a really contentious sort of thing. And I was about 30 days sober and my wife left me. And so when she moved out, it was like a whole team of people took off, and it was just me and my cat Tammy Faye. And so there we were, just kind of trying to figure this thing out. And and I loved that cat. She was so sweet. Anyway, she was a calico. She was crazy. One of the things she did, she didn't like my wife at the time. And so when we would do laundry, she would separate the clothes and she would pee just on hers. Can you believe that? She knew she was intuitive, that Tammy Faye, and she was up to no good also. I love that cat. I just love her. I miss her so much. So what are you afraid of? Abandonment, economic insecurity, all of this stuff, dollar signs, all of this. What are you afraid? They would make a list. The third part of the inventory was, who have you hurt? Now, some say, well, what about the sexual inventory part, that it talks about? Well, they just looked at harms. That's just another kind of a harm. And so it was just, who have you hurt? So you made a list of who you hurt. And so this is how they did it. So you came up with 3 lists, and you, as the big book says, you get prepared for a long, long talk. And so and the who, what, and the why. And so what is the sponsor doing? Well, the sponsor is looking for tendencies. The sponsor is looking for patterns, don't you know? And all. And the sponsor, I like this notion too. When I take 5th steps, I try to become a heart with ears, just a big old heart with ears. I'm not there to give advice. I'm not there, I'm just there to give this person, give this man or woman presence. You just loving presence without condemnation, because the stuff that is shared is stuff that maybe's never been said before that needs to be said. I'll never forget when I got through with my inventory, my sponsor, I closed the little spiral notebook, and I'd gone over my lists, and my sponsor said, he looked up at me and he said, "Did you leave anything out?" I thought maybe he knew something that had been in the paper or something that I had like forgotten, or something. And I thought, I don't think so. But I'll never forget this. He told me, this was one of the most touching parts of the whole process. He told me, "Well, I think you did good." And he said, and what he told me then was really the one thing I wanted to say to you guys if I was going to say anything important. He looked at me and he said, as I say to you, he said, "You are a good man who has suffered under the lash of a terrible disease. And it's caused you to do some things you would have never done if you hadn't had it. And because of that," he said, "you are forgiven." And he said, here's the way the forgiveness piece works. He said, the people in the rooms of recovery around here, they all forgive you. He said, the people in the rooms of recovery all over Mississippi forgive you. He said, the people in all over the world in foreign countries like Alabama, they all forgive you. He says, I forgive you. And most importantly, God forgives you because you're a good man and you've suffered terribly under the lash of a disease you didn't ask to have. We were unwitting participants in this terrible, terrible disease that much of what I did, not all, but much of what I did under the influence of that terrible disease, caused me to do terrible things. And that was a moment, I think, when recovery got really, really real for me right then. I never take a 5th step without imparting forgiveness, and letting people know that they can be forgiven. So what were we talking about? Oh, that's right. So character defects. So then you come up with the character defects. So you come up with, you come up with anger, you come up with, living in abject anger, living in fear, selfishness. My sponsor told me I hadn't come up with anything new. He was like, I was just rehashing a lot of stuff. Dishonesty, you know what I mean? And so he says, so we're going to look at the opposites of these. So we're moving the opposite of anger, I'm just going to say could be like forgiveness. I mean, there could be a lot of ways to say that. Opposite of fear, one way to look at it might be faith. The opposite of selfishness might be, usefulness. Maybe the opposite of dishonesty, of course, honesty, right? And so the question is, what voice are we listening to? I've been to a bazillion meetings, and my sponsor told me something that just really jumped out at me. He said, that voice is going to be speaking to you, this voice of addiction, and it's going to have anger, it's going to have fear, it's going to have selfishness, and it's going to have a propensity for dishonesty. And he says, you need to learn the pace and the tone of the voice because you're going to be hearing from it for a long, long time. And the process of the steps is to move us into the voice of recovery so that I'm not listening to the voice of anger. I'm moving into the voice of forgiveness. That I'm moving away from the voice of fear into the voice of faith. I'm moving out of selfishness into usefulness, and I'm moving out of honesty and into honesty. And this is how I learned to practice the steps. So that's another. So let's look at this. Now, you guys know, I know you know, because y'all are smart. Y'all are not in Mississippi. You're in North Carolina. Y'all are smart people. And so I know that you guys know that that AA and the 12 steps, did you know there's over 300 different anonymous fellowships that practice the 12 steps? Over 300 different ones. AA just gives them away, and but it came from 12-step recovery came from the Oxford group. There's nothing new. If it was said that if there was any real genius of Bill Wilson, the genius of Bill Wilson is the 12 traditions. Nobody had ever constructed a business model as an upside down triangle, where all of the power is with the individual and the individual group. And as you get down here to the committee, they have very little power at all. Nobody, this business model, and this is how the traditions is formed. And this business model, of personal recovery depends on AA unity, but all the group, every group is autonomous and can do anything that they want as long as it's not harming AA. So groups we don't report to some central body. There's no single person. They can choose to give money to the central office or not. They can do it any way they want, and they can still be an AA group. Nobody had ever envisioned a business model, but Bill Wilson in his genius knew that if it wasn't that way, that money, prosperity, prestige, and all of that would just tear this thing apart, and it would have never survived. Now, here's the heart and soul of this. So in the Oxford group, they had 4 spiritual principles that the Oxford group used. And the first one was called surrender, right? The second principle, spiritual principle that founded the Oxford group was sharing, right? The third spiritual principle, they called it restitution. We call it amends. In Mississippi, we couldn't spell restitution. It had to be shorter. So in the last spiritual principle was guidance. And this is where the steps came from. All Will Wilson just expanded this into the 12 steps. So surrender became steps 1, 2, and 3. Those are the surrender steps, right? Sharing, he expanded into steps 4 through 7. I make my 7s like a French girl. I don't know why. It's just the way they come out. There you go. Amends, you guys know, became steps 8 and 9, right? And guidance was expanded to be steps 10 through 12. I got to hear an old recording of Bill Wilson, and he was going to discuss on this recording where the steps came from, how he came up with the 12 steps. And I was so excited to listen to an old original crackly recording of Bill Wilson. I couldn't believe it. This spiritual giant is going to share. And he talks like this. He talks like Jason Robards and da, 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 da. And I'm listening to this guy and I'm going to hear. And so he says, and then we came up with the steps and we thought, well, 7 is not enough. Maybe we make it 12. And I'm going, this is the organization that I'm following. 7 wasn't enough. And so we like the number 12. What sort of a chicken, outfit have I joined? I'm like, I just turned the tape off. I was so disappointed. This was the spiritual giant I'm following. You got to be kidding me. Please, you got to have something more than that. Make something up, for heaven's sakes. Don't go telling people the truth. Anyway, so here you go. So surrender, sharing, amends, and guidance. These are the steps. Now, it's very Western of us to think of things linearly, right? And the steps are even linear. You do step 1, you do step 2, you on and on and on. Get to step 12, you're exhausted. You need ice cream. You need to need a nap or something. Well, so here's the thing. But it's very Eastern, right, to think in things that are circular, right? So think of this. Okay, so there's your circle. Anyway, it's sort of a circle. And so let's do another one. It's circles have been around forever and ever. And if we do this, now we have a medicine wheel, right? Now, medicine wheels and the 4 quadrants represent a whole bunch of different things. You guys know they represent the 4 directions. They represent the 3 primary colors plus black, right? They represent the 4 seasons, right? They represent the seasons of a person's life. Here I am over here at the end. Alex is over here. We're like, whoa, hey, but it represents a day, right? So here's what we do. So in the morning, when we get up, we get on our knees and we surrender. We ask God to keep us sober throughout the day, right? Right? We may do the 3rd step or the 7-step prayer or both, but in the morning we get up and we do our surrender. And that is, when I say this prayer, God, please help me stay sober today, which is the thing my sponsor, that was the only thing that he said I had to do. It was everything else was going to be a suggestion, but that was the one thing he drilled into me that you must do. And so in the morning when I say, God, please help me stay sober today, well, first of all, if I'm down on my knees and I'm asking God to keep me sober for the day, if I don't have a problem, what are you doing on your knees? What are you doing on the floor? And if I don't believe that there's a power that could help me, why am I wasting my time praying? And if I'm asking for just help throughout the day, isn't that the simplest of all 3rd-step prayers? So boom, right there, I do my surrender and I've taken steps 1, 2, and 3. Throughout the day, as I go through my day, I share, right? I'm on my morning Zoom meeting. I'm reaching out to my recovery friends. I'm checking in with the alumni. I may be hollering at Katie or Tom or, somebody just to check in to say, how are you doing? Just to see. And I tell the truth about what's going on with me. If I'm struggling with something, I tell the truth. Or if I've had a big victory, I tell the truth. I share from the heart. And when I do that, I am doing a little 4th and 5th step. I'm telling the truth. And so I'm taking steps 4 through 7 when I share. As I go through the day, I may recognize that I need to back up and I need to rectify something. I may have rushed out of the house too soon. Sometimes with a 5-year-old, he started kindergarten this year. It can be a fire drill trying to get out of the house. Oh my gosh, and the dog is like running around and where's his lunch and who got the orange juice and and Alex is like, do I need pants today? And I'm like, yeah, that'd be good. Pants, it's Mississippi, but even still, pants that's something good. And and I may need to circle back with Beth and say, I raced out of here like a crazy man. And I forgot to tell you I love you. And I just wanted to thank you for all the wonderful stuff you're doing. I can pause and I can make amends. Steps 8 and 9, right? And then at the end of my day, we pray. We pray for guidance. We summarize our day. Is there something that I could have done better? Is there any amends I need to make? We ask for guidance. It's the last part of the serenity prayer, that wisdom to know the difference. That's the tricky part, and I don't know. I need guidance. I get guidance from you. I get guidance from the people that I share with. I get inspiration from the things I read. I seek guidance. And when I do, I am taking steps 10, 11, and 12. So as you move through your day, don't you see that you're walking this wheel? And if you notice that there's two circles. We don't do this alone. We're in community. We walk this wheel with our alumni friends. We walk this wheel with our sponsor. We walk this wheel with a sharing partner. We walk the wheel every day. Now, what's the beginning of a wheel? Doesn't have a beginning. You and I may wake up in the morning and think, oh my gosh, I need to make an amend. We may start right here. It doesn't matter. We're going through this process every day. In a sense, aren't we taking all 12 steps every day? And this is the process that we use to help keep us centered, keep us into the steps. It's, of course, in the beginning, we take the steps, but remember, in the 1940s, we take the steps quickly and often, and we move over time into this process of living the steps and sharing this journey with other people. We walk the wheel, we walk the medicine wheel of recovery. We get better together. What do you think? Do you like that? Do you like that? I like that. I like that. So Wally and I first heard Wally. I heard he was going to be speaking in Austin, Texas at a mental health facility. Perfect. And so I drove to Austin with my sponsor. I met Wally and I took the Back to Basics workshop, and I was amazed. I was absolutely amazed. I brought the thing back to the treatment center where I was working at the time, and I started taking everybody. We started doing this workshop all the time, every patient. And then when clients would go back home, they would say, can you come to my home group? So I was like flying all over, going to home groups, driving. I drive all over the place. I drive to Chicago. I'm crazy. And do these workshops. So I lost track somewhere along the line. I stopped counting when I got over 7,000 people through the steps, doing this workshops and all and over. And it has been a godsend. If you're interested in that, this book, The Back to Basics Recovery by Wally Patton is a godsend. The original AA version is just called Back to Basics. He wrote it as a history book of the beginner meetings of the 1940s. And when the thing was released, all people started thinking of it as a how to get sober book. He offered the thing to AA. AA turned it down. Certain chapters of the book are conference approved. AA did ask him to change the title. He had a title change in there that he did for AA. And he offered the book to Hazelden Publishing, who turned it down. To this day, Hazelden says it was the greatest literary mistake of their entire publishing career, because it sold, I think it's 750,000 copies now in multiple languages. It's gone all over the world. And I made a commitment. I'll finish with this. I made a commitment a long time ago that I was going to take as many people through the steps as I possibly could, as long as I have a breath. And, and God is letting that come true, So I'm really grateful to share this with you as kind of an introductory sort of a thing, for you. And I hope this sparks, some interest in you. And I want you to know I'll put my, chat, my stuff or something. I'll say anyway, if I can ever help any of you, if you ever have questions or anything, I'm here for you. So God bless you all. I love you guys. I don't know you, but I love you. I love that you're here, that you're taking this time to be here tonight, that you really care about your recovery, and you're putting recovery up there, way up there. Uh, my sponsor told me one time, he said, how many first priorities can you have? you know and so he said, if I'd make my recovery my first priority, amazing things were going to happen. It's not your only priority, it's just your first priority. And son of a gun, he was right. I found a whole new way to help people and to be a part of something special, and doing this tonight is just one more of those something specials. So Tom, I love you, buddy. Katie, thank you for letting me be here with you guys. I'll stick around if there's any comments or questions or anything. And God bless.